Welcome to another edition of the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins, as always sponsored by the People's Institute for Revolutionary Semiotics. Before we introduce our guest today, we just want to mention briefly, we do have a Patreon account at patreon.com/MUHH. Consider tossing us $1 a month. We are offering access to our Discord server, as well as a reading group that is taking place there that Taylor has gracefully taken the lead on, a recent translation of Axel Chernyavsky's, I always forget the title.
Deleuze's philosophy, or shit. Is that what it is? Yeah, and the creation of concepts. Deleuze's philosophy and the creation of concepts. Yeah, come join the reading group. I'm going to use you as guinea pigs to go through all the translations I've recently done.
And those, you've already recorded, 3 or 4 episodes of that?
Yeah,
unedited content that is available for patrons as well. So we're offering something back to you guys now, at least. So
yeah, we're no longer bums,
right?
The bums will always lose, Lebowski.
The bums will always lose, indeed. Speaking of bums, we have one of our favorite in attendance today. Today we're going to be joined by Adam Jones. I'm riffing this off from the your author. No. Whatever description that's on the website, just so you know. But this makes you sound real official, so I'm going to keep on going. A philosopher from East London whose work focuses on insurrectionary communist thought, cybernetics, and the ways in which systems of social control function today. For the past 4 years, he has also co-hosted the hit podcast, Acid Horizon.
Podcast.
That's right.
What are we, chopped liver?
With whom he wrote Anti-Oculus, A Philosophy of Escape, which I did see in person and have a really lovely photo with Will
Nice.
as promotional materials you guys can utilize for that. But enough touring around, I suppose, and just a hearty machinic welcome, Adam.
No, thank you both for having me, and I apologize for the slightly attempted viral marketing that Collective Inc. put on the author page. The hit podcast.
That's right. No, I love it.
It's gone viral, yeah.
This was the blurb. This was the blurb, right? Yeah, the viral podcast, Acid Horizon. No, that's good.
I was awesome to be back.
Adam, you are a honorary member of the Institute for Revolutionary.
That's right. Yes.
Oh yeah.
The Undersecretary of Cybernetics.
Yeah, the Undersecretary.
There's enough Baudrillard in here. I think I can get away with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you even referenced semio-capitalism, and so
yeah.
I was reading actually last night. Janosko, I guess it's in the Guattari Effect. He's got a nice essay on semio-capitalism, and he throws out. He's like, yeah, it's so popular. It's influenced people like Lazzarato and Berardi. And so when you brought up semio-capitalism and you referenced Berardi, I was like, okay, that's nice. Janosko would give the thumbs up.
Did you guys talk to Bifo recently? Am I making that up?
No.
Is that a fever dream?
No, me and Kenny spoke to Bifo recently about his new book on depression and quitting everything. And I sent Franco the PDF afterwards. I'm like, look, I use a lot of your work in this. I want to develop some of your work on energetics and attention economy. And no, he liked it. He ended up endorsing the book, and I was like, hell yeah, it's good to still be in this kind of lineage, yeah, the schizoanalytic semiotic lineage.
Nice. Yeah, I noticed that the what do you call it? The blurbs, the endorsements. If we want to be a little less, if you're not into the whole brevity thing. No, I was like, oh man, that's nice. That's a nice little Bifo.
I'll have to take a look at the Bifo book because I'm probably going to quit my job, and I'm also about to be very depressed, I think.
I'm thinking about
in the coming months.
Depression. Yeah.
Looking into it. But anyways,
very good book for that.
We'll actually be serious for a moment somewhat. And I don't know if we've ever really asked you for your philosophical origin story, which I like to kind of give a preamble of this kind of being a singularity, some type of intensive moment, an encounter with a thinker, maybe a film, a book you read. an experience, a teacher, someone that inspired you, etc. Effectively, something that ignited your passion for philosophy and theory. And feel free to
Ooh,
take that where
yeah.
you may. And if you want to tie that into this book and the reason why you wrote it,
Mm.
that'd be great as well.
So where did I start with philosophy? I think one of the vectors that got me started was a band actually called Anal Nafrak.
Yeah.
They were a black death metal industrial grindcore, all of that constantly being fused. A bit of operatics in there as well. And they always used to sing a lot about stuff like Nietzsche. They did a song once called Paragon Pariah about Stirner. And I was a huge like black metal guy. I was kind of more into like sort of the hard sciences at one point, particularly sort of astrophysics. But then once I decided to take a philosophy course, because I was an argumentative little bastard, and that kind of just took me in it from there. I used to sort of quite obsessively sort of read like Platonic dialogues, and of course, Plato and Nietzsche are pretty much rudimentary kind of starting points. And I want to. I mean, I don't know. At least in terms of sort of high school, I guess is the equivalent in the US. I wasn't that bad at it, and so I sort of started it through undergrad, mostly trained in analytic philosophy, which I found insufferable because it was constantly a method of my intuition is this, and I'm just going to bite the bullet on it, and I'm going to form arguments around my intuition, which are like really, in this sense, was really strong seemings. And I was looking for something a bit more self-grounding, a bit more harder to refute than just the pure disagreement, which is not ultimately possible. But that's what led me to in third year, I think, or was it second year? There was a class on Hegel. And Hegel he offers you so much, does Hegel? A self-grounding system, a presuppositionless system, which for is basically the anti-analytic philosophy. And you just have to sort of stick with it, and it's going to cash out eventually. The system's going to be complete, and I was sort of enamored. Phenomenology of spirit, that was the idea of the system, and then that sort of fused with my earlier sort of interest in Nietzscheanism and sort of nihilism with Stirner, did my undergrad thesis that way. But the place where I was at was going to be quite restricting in terms of doing anything outside of a very sort of tweedy Oxford, Cambridge-based sort of tradition of philosophy. So I went to the Centre for Research in Modern European Philosophy, Kingston. That's where I did my master's and then my PhD. Sort of mostly sort of imbibing as much Hegel, Kant, a lot of Nietzsche and Heidegger as well. Lots of Deleuze on Nietzsche, which is my sort of first book on that. And
Is it is have I asked you this? Is Henry at Kingston? Henry Summers Hall?
no, he's a apartment not too actually reasonably far from us. He's at Royal Holloway.
Oh,
Um,
that's right. Fuck.
Henry's at Royal Holloway with people like Nathan Widder as well, who I think has also been on this show. Yeah, they're sort of definitely the more Deleuze-Guattarian side of teaching things, whereas the lineage of sort of Kingston is more like sort of these lot
Somebody's
of
at
students with
Kingston.
Gilliam Rhodes. Um,
Somebody's at fucking Kingston that I've emailed, and I
is it?
swear.
I mean, Catherine Malibu was at Kingston for a few years.
Okay.
My supervisors at Kingston were it was Catherine Malibu originally, and then she retired. It was Peter Horwoods, which is very quite interesting given what we all do in Deleuze. People keep saying read Peter Horwood. I'm like I've worked with him for about 4 years,
Yeah,
lads.
I
It's
fucking
fine.
know the guy.
Yeah, like this isn't some sort of grand refutation. And then people like Peter Osborne as well, Howard Kegel, Stella Sanford, Eric Aliez. He's also at Kingston. Really fantastic centre, as well as Roll Holloway, of course, for modern European philosophy in the UK. Stayed there for a while, did my sort of master's thesis on not Stirner, uh, Hegel versus Nietzsche on the concept of time, as read
Oh,
through the
nice.
mythology of alcoholism, particularly Bacchus and Dionysus. And then stayed there for my PhD on Stirner. Recently finished that in the last few weeks. I just need to make a few minor edits, but that's sort of me done. And this is where I am now, really. And
Congratulations,
no, thank you. And in the
Doctor
meantime,
Doctor Jones.
yeah, of the Aqua Song fame, none of that Indiana Jones nonsense. I'm not gonna steal anything from any indigenous cultures. And then alongside the PhD, past 4 years, I bumped into Guys Massive Horizon online, and as we all know, we've been doing that ever since.
Do you remember the line? I think it's in Raiders of the Lost Ark where he's like, he's like, class, this is this is archaeology. This is where we study facts. If you're looking for truth, philosophy's down the hall or some shit like that. Like I am paraphrasing, obviously, but
No, I think that's
that's
pretty spot on to
That's
what he
pretty much
said.
it.
Yeah.
That's
if you're
verbatim.
looking for truth,
I
philosophy's
was
down the hall.
curious if you know the movie film that Anal Nathrakh comes from.
Excalibur by John
Oh,
Borman.
there it is.
Yeah,
Excellent. Love it.
we
When I
spoke to
was a
John
kid,
Borman a few months
I
ago.
know, right? What was that for that movie? Was it Zarda?
Zardoz.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, with fucking Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Reverend Mother, Charlotte Rampling.
Mhm.
Ah, okay. All right. They got the Dune reference in pretty
That's
early
right.
here.
Exactly.
Damn right.
Indeed.
Okay.
I wasn't even planning on that.
You have a quota to fill, so
That's right. Indeed. A checklist, if you will. But we could sort of jump into the actual work itself, which, I mean, we've discussed through DM, I think
Mhm.
some of these general material, the kind of libidinal economy of online, I'll refer to it as.
Mhm.
Um,
Elon's helping me to disassemble my new flesh, by the way. I've definitely in the past year or so been unplugging from social media. So, thank you, Elon.
One of the first things that you point out in the book, I think, is the sort of the historical iteration and advancement of communication technologies
Mm.
and how they sort of impact the cultural landscape and the economic landscape, etc., which is something I've often referred to whenever I forget who it was that asked me, do you think acceleration is still going on? And I was like, oh, absolutely, of course. Look at commerce technology because you start out with even online commerce, right? Like you had a website, pets.com or something like that you would put in an order. Well, now you can not only do a one touch order from your smartphone, there are now even transactions within transactions within transactions, right? With microtransactions, a common gaming thing, DLCs, etc. So definitely an acceleration and like the key point I think I want to take away is like discussing maybe the way that this perhaps I guess the sort of the smoothing of the space of commerce and communication. I don't know if that's enough. You would maybe want to speak to that general historical process and how that informs this
Mhm.
book or something along those lines.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I sort of start the book off with is by doing a bit of a parody of Nick Land's Meltdown, or these like very common you see in documentaries and various lots of tech bro slop. Um, these ideas like, oh, suddenly we get the printing press in Europe, and then suddenly we get the pager, and then it's going faster every time. And suddenly, at this rate, we're going to be, in a self-conscious computational machine, and our consciousness are all going to be uploaded. This sort of history of technology that sees technology as the agent of history, um, and is necessarily in a positive feedback loop with itself, which is also, I think, at least at this point, is the default Landian position. I don't think he's going to articulate another one. Um, even though he has recently survived that heart attack, sadly, he's not going to articulate anything better than that.
He had a heart attack, really?
Well, if that Twitter account everyone thinks is him has started claiming that he's defeated death, so I'm assuming so. Um,
Interesting.
we'll get
He has a heart.
exactly. That's the thing. Like tough lads. We'll get him next time.
Coldness be my I don't know, heartbeat something.
My pacemaker.
There we go.
Be my god. But yeah, so that's sort of the Sandlandian position, I think, and people tell you it's more complex than that. It really isn't. And that's what to say first and foremost that it was bullshit. So the example I start off with, which is one of the really accelerating examples of that sort of position, which is the printing press, particularly in the age of the Reformation, when information really starts getting highly circulated throughout Central Europe, such that languages become sort of standardized around it. For example, the Luther Bible standardizing sort of formal written German. Um, and I just said, look, the Chinese had movable print whilst you lot were still inscribing like fake gospels onto the carcass of a sheep. It's not just technology that's making these things go. It's all about the social relations and the political vectors. So I'm talking about, for example, the various political movements around the Reformation. So, for example, sort of revolution from above, which is various laws trying to compete with the church, and instead also with the emperor to essentially gain loads and loads of titles, gain like the money that's hidden, no, that's not hidden, sorry, that's stored in these big sources of wealth, like monasteries and shrines and the like. Essentially, sometimes to try and compete with the Holy Roman Emperor's sort of colonial ventures, usually in Peru with Peruvian silver. And then there's there's a Reformation from below that's also using this printing press, this communications technology to spread ideas about peasant revolution, because at the time the peasants are facing higher taxes, their traditional land rights being taken away. I'm like, okay, these communication technologies are proliferating mostly because of social relations. The technology is not the vector here. And so I take up this point that's articulated by so many people. I mean, I particularly chose to cite the Xenofeminist Manifesto, that technology is always a matter of social relations. It was an attempt to essentially try and restore the agency of social relation back to the subject matter of accelerationism. Essentially, I'm the guy standing up and saying, some of us are still Marxists, but not rather than doing that, say, to get rid of what they were doing, rather to intensify cybernetic thought beyond any sort of semblance of hype for these machines, because we've seen the rise of machines get basically come and go, and it's left us with this.
Well, damn,
Yeah.
you very skillfully, I don't know if you were looking at my notes to really help generate that, but you were anticipating. I think one of the standout lines that really jumped off the page for me was the one, I mean, you emphasized the function is the relation. I can't remember the rest of it. And the relation is everything, maybe.
Well, let me double check.
I believe that's the quote, which
The
I thought
function is key because the function is the relation, and the relation is everything when it comes to understanding the new
the new
flesh.
flesh, right? Exactly. So I don't know if we benefit from you elaborating further beyond what you just did there, but if you have anything to add, that just kind of jumped out at me when I was looking over my notes this morning.
Well, it is interesting, right? Just thinking about, since you do become increasingly Deleuze-Guattarian throughout the book. I'm just thinking about how they bring up the question, always seemingly in context of Fernand Braudel work, right? Why capitalism here when all the conditions seemingly were, say, you brought up China, right, where could be found there, and so the question of this contingency is seemingly pointing to your argument, or I think could be used in service of your argument, that it is about a certain, not just the development of technological progress, if you will, right, in this abstract way, as though technology occurred in a vacuum, but having to do with the social relations on the ground. And so I can see that mobilizing or at least dovetailing with your argument there.
I mean, I'm not going to necessarily give a whole historical, but I think it would make sense to look at something like the Reformation as a keystone in the development of capitalism in Europe as it spreads sort of globally. You can't stick there too much in terms of Central Europe necessarily, because you do have to think about the development of things like the Iron Bridge foundries in Iron Bridge in the UK, and sort of the fusion, for example, of the Dutch and English systems of managing royal debt, which bring everything together. But if you want to talk about, freeing up an incredible amount of wealth from monasteries for reformed princes, I mean, essentially you now have there the money which you no longer have to sort of sacrifice. There's no munus of wealth, as Bataille would say. There's no obligation of wealth. Now you can just spend it, so it makes its own money. And now you have essentially an emperor's level of commands, almost completely secularized, to do as thou wilt with it, to be honest. And I think you can sort of fund more nobles to fight for you. Essentially, it all becomes using that money as the main command mechanism, and that capital relation becomes central to it. Whereas before, there were competing forces other than capital, I guess.
So when Jesus, famously kicked out the money lenders from the shrine, he was really trying to keep the decoding of flows from occurring, right? I mean, he was preventing capitalism. No.
Oh, I mean, because they were money changers, weren't they? In terms of
Yeah,
what
they were
coins were
money
there.
lenders, money changers, right? So it's almost
Yeah.
like if they became a part of the temple complex,
Mm.
the monastery complex we
Mhm.
could fast forward to, if they had already been integrated into that, then maybe right there you would have already had the site of one of the sites of the acceleration
Mhm.
of capital. Anyway, I said that a little tongue in cheek, but there's something that you can always kind of look into what exactly is it just about the sacred, or can it not be read in a kind of Marxist lens?
Mhm.
So
I mean, I
Interesting.
think your point about the way that the monasteries, I mean, it's interesting the repetition of the sort of, I would call it maybe like if you want to think of, apply that same sort of historical structure to something like the online commons, right? The distribution of
Mhm.
like message boards, right? Like these niche message boards across, bodybuilding.com forums, etc., just to be really
Mm.
really funny. But like, there's a lot of knowledge, right, that was contained in these disparate niche online communities that were dispersed, and now we see even online the tendency of capital to consolidate these things into the platforms
Mm.
that you point out, and the rise of the platform as the dominant form of participating in online social media, I think, is an important, and there's a refrain there of consolidation and appropriation of the
Mhm.
common knowledge, even as it applies to obscure shit, right? Like, I'm sure there were great Dune message boards, etc. back in the day. Maybe
now
other,
there's subreddits.
now there's subreddits. Now the
Mhm.
subreddit is Google now relies on subreddits. So it's
Right.
really interesting how
Mm.
the cannibalization and centralization that occurs. If that sparks any commentary,
Well, I mean, I think
please
the
feel free.
no, I think you're completely correct. I mean, I agree fully with Tiziana Terranova. The internet is dead, and I think the old images that people used to have of the internet as a sort of a frontier, as essentially, we're building things, we're mapping out this territory, and like, no, no, it's only ever been a mapping. It wasn't map. We didn't quite work out the cartography, but the cartography is very much stratified. Um, Platforms, I think, do dominate the internet. I don't think it's really. I mean, even in terms, for example, the absolute almost universality of something like Amazon Web Services. Um, it is now essentially a selection of monopolies. Uh, I mean, there is something people like about this to some extent. It is easier because before, forums were never interoperable. You couldn't take your posts with you. It was
Yeah.
only confined there. You can't. And the same thing with most social media companies now, but they're so big because they grow through various network effects, as Cory Doctorow points out, that people don't really want to take because there's more to lose by leaving them if they're interoperable. Whereas a forum, it's easier to sort of disappear a bit, or maintain the same moniker, the same sort of tag. Um, in terms of this sort of consolidation, yeah, I mean, I think I define the platform as essentially a production line. I'm trying to spend a lot of time with this book, essentially just to demythologize the idea of cyberspace, because the idea that it's not like a separate strata. I think there's actually a risk from a Deleuze-Guattari perspective that this book actually might make an argument that this, for example, one of the strata for Deleuze-Guattari of sort of more human sort of semiosis and the basically the strata between biology and semiotics might have actually just collapsed at this point because there's not actually this ideal structure laying over all the top of it. It's actually just the same infrastructure. The internet is built on server banks, which is built on colonial process of extraction. It's not at the cloud isn't out there. Dan McQuillan actually wrote an amazing book called Resisting AI, and he recently said that I don't know why we call it the cloud. We should be calling it the drought.
The
Clouds
the
get
what? What
clouds.
say that again? They
He
should be
said
called
we shouldn't be calling it the cloud. We should be calling it the drought.
the drought. Okay, gotcha.
Because all of these things do is suck up incredible amounts of water for their cooling and amounts of
Yeah,
resources. A cloud that once upon a time would dispense rain.
yeah,
You ain't
yeah.
getting shit like that.
If Lenin were around today, he would say attack the data servers, and he would be right.
I can't disagree with that.
um, I want to emphasize too. I think the process of, in my notes I have this very cliche phrase: "Your network is your net worth," and the worth of these platforms is obviously the content which is generated without compensation, largely, although Elon is paying the worst people on the earth to vomit their dog shit tweets. Um,
Well, Adam was also, just to jump in. I like how you made the fact that the content isn't necessarily the production of the post, but it's immediately the consumption of them, right? And that
Mm.
itself is content for, and going back to what Coop said, for the data, feeding the data
right,
that
the
can be
feedback loop
sold, and
aspect.
yeah, the
Mhm.
feedback loop. Right. It's very, again, very Marxist, very Grundrisse, right? Like the consumption is immediately production, etc.
Only intensified and sped up.
Right.
Mhm. No, yeah. Anytime you consume anything online, typically it produces metric, especially on big social media platforms. All
Yeah.
consumption is production. Anytime you stop, it records when you stop, and that is a kind of labor. I mean, in terms of your net worth being your network, I mean, yes, to the extent that, or at least, if capital is command over unpaid labor, a network of influence, to be an influencer is essentially have the ability to command a bunch of people to do free labor. It doesn't feel like work, but it's still labor because it still produces a commodity. To code that commodity in your direction, because they're going to spread the word. And if it's spreading the
Yeah.
word, now spreading the word is fine, but spreading the word on a platform, I think just have to realize that on a platform that is specifically a mode of production. Well, it's not mode. It's an event of production. Something is being made there. Because anytime you move through sort of the circuits of cyberspace, of controlled space, there's recording. You don't have to be paranoid about it. I just think we should think about how these things more directly work. Because I think sometimes people treat, and they're perfectly fine to treat it this way because it usually does work in this way. Sort of big open social media platforms as something like a big group chat. Um, but this is to the extent wrong. You can usually act like these, but the problem with social media platforms, in some sense, is they are not echo chambers and never have been. Which is why a bunch of leftists can have a debate about God knows what on Twitter, and then a fascist can immediately look in because there's no barrier to anyone looking at anyone's difference, unless you lock your account or something, maybe. But not even blocks work like that anymore. It is completely porous medium of communication, which is why opinion columnists spend most of their time on Twitter, basically doing summaries of things they've seen from people who they hate and who should hopefully hate them back. It's not at all a walled. It's a walled garden in terms of if you leave it, but in terms of the content we produce here, it is just one huge inscriptive, or rather recording inscriptive machine.
Yeah. And the more the more the sort of the post, if you will, just stick to that simple idea, the more it sort of gains some traction within your intended audience and community, the more it is susceptible to being seen outside of that. And therefore that that's why we have this image of being in a walled garden talking to our friends. But you're right. I mean, it's very much if you make a popular post, if it goes viral,
Mm,
even it doesn't have to go viral really in the big sense, but it can go like micro viral and easily leak outside of the intended audience, which is why that concept of whether it be echo chamber or a bubble or or even intended audience itself is
mm,
very I would say unstable, right?
absolutely.
I think I wanted to emphasize again the like dead labor in history and their role in, like, because the network being the net worth is the fact that the pre-existing social relations that we encounter, sort of the centralization of the platforms and the erection of these platforms on a universal, let's say, I mean, perhaps not universal, but bear with me, basis would mean that it's like you're forced into, now if you want to participate in some type of online discussion, like these are where you can get the most reach, the most bang for your buck if you have a message. that you want to get out there, whatever that message may be, right? Like you're somewhat enslaved to the historical process of this consolidation, which obviously constrains our ability, right?
It it does, but I don't know how much the people building these things necessarily know that. I mean, in terms, for example, Elon Musk, he's as much new flesh as he's much of a product of the system as he is the owner of it. These systems don't particularly care who owns them. If you use them, you're in the same feedback loop as anything else. He's been eating his own semiotic shit, and he's given himself a kind of Habsburg semiotic sort of prion syndrome. And in terms of yeah, this is me ragging on Elon a bit, but I think that is nonetheless accurate. And in terms of messages you can get out there, I mean, these machines still are quite good. They still the machines are good for getting various messages out there. You couldn't before, you know, go to you could before you couldn't really go to a CEO and say you're a stupid fucker and I hope you die. You can do that now to various CEOs directly to them, and they will get mad at it. Previously in human history, that usually carried a death sentence. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good political activity, but there's other things, I mean, there's a lot of anti-raids networks and cop watch networks that are very big on Twitter and are good at what they do because of that ability to dispense information. I think in a way it's kind of a little bit like a accelerated handheld version of the post office, no pun intended, which yes, it is technically run by a genocidal state run on behalf of even more genocidal billionaires. It's also the post office. And I think that if we start sort of looking in that more immediate way, then the question, for example, propagandizing, networking, getting GoFundMe's out right now for people in Palestine, for example, you don't quite get that necessarily on Blue Sky. You could cultivate something like that, but so far you're not. And I think in terms of distribution mechanisms, these aren't neutral machines, but they're not exactly always as good as being as evil as they'd like to be.
That was good. I like the direction you took that. Uh, I think maybe the thing that hit me, and I do intend to pun there with respect to the book, was this idea of this intense somatic impact that social media has on us, and your really crystallized example of the phantom notification. Please feel free to, if you want to take that and run with that as far as the book is concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, just to let you, Adam, I will say we've all felt that, and it doesn't even have to be social media. It could be I phantom text, right? Phantom phone call, the phantom vibration, which heralds something from the beyond, whether it be media, the push notifications. We've all felt that phantom itch vibration.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll start off with a bit of a history of that then, actually, because I was looking at sort of history of this thing of where you feel something has gone off, you feel like a vibration or something in your phone or devices in the other room. And the reason why I was looking into this was because I was trying to think of how does instantaneous communication technology and our integration into it as a node in a communication network, it's producing communications, producing data. How does this affect the body? Because traditionally, in sort of classical cybernetics, I say metaphor, but for many of them it wasn't a metaphor, which was brain equals computer. Brain works like a computer, nerves system works like a computer, therefore they're interactable, and there you get shit like Elon Musk's stupid idea of Neuralink and Slavoj Žižek's even stupider book that he wrote about Neuralink because he can't come up with an original idea. Didn't mention Catherine Malibu once, and a Hegelian thinker of the brain. Completely useless book. And I thought, okay, how are we just going to undermine this? We can undermine this very simply, this brain computer direct correlation nonsense. I mean, you could do it by reading Niall Unbound. That's a very good critique of sort of computational idealism. But instead, you could look at the fact that the brain and computers, cyberspace, computational diagrams, they're all maps, right? And the idea is that a computational mapping can be applied to the brain as a territory to basically identify that structure and then move one onto the other. The brain's relationship to the body, as people like Catherine Malibu, Maurice Merleau-Ponty sort of point out, is not really of a it's not the brain's not a territory in its relationship to the body. Rather, when cyberspace and the brain interact, well, cyberspace and a human being, brain and body interact, it's actually two different map territory systems interacting. So the brain does not have an immediate relationship to the body. It has a mapping of the body, an intensive mapping, a sort of body schema. And that is why when people lose limbs, they can still feel them. The mapping of the body is plastic, to use Catherine's term. It's malleable. And I was thinking, okay, where do we see this in the current way in which humans are integrated into systems of communication? The first way we see it is where these systems are extended, where these body schemas are extended, and that is phantom vibration syndrome, or faux alarms, it's often called. And I was looking at the history of this, and the first sort of time it was really taken up was in ER departments. So people with pagers would feel them go off because they are in a high intensity, accelerated, quick response, central to their sort of, a job they very much identify as doing and sort of very much built into their sort of conscious and self-conscious lives. That is something they experience. And they don't particularly mind it in the survey. I was looking at a study from the British Medical Journal, probably about 30 years ago now, and I thought, okay, there's a sense in which I think if we use these tools, we can say the body schema is actually extending the map of the body that the brain has. Now, you go a little bit too far if you want to go full sort of neuromancer about this. So instead, I always wanted to look at, okay, where do they clash? Where the cyberspace? Where's this mapping? And where these two map territory systems, server bank, cyberspace, roughly body and brain, where do they clash? And I was looking at something that's called cyber sickness. That's actually the term. It's a brilliant. I was thinking a while ago of doing something on cyber psychosis in the cyberpunk vein, but I thought this stuff was way better. Cyber sickness it was first discovered by the US military, who also discovered cybernetics, I guess. And it was the idea of people in flight simulators feeling sick, or why do people sometimes feel sick when they're in VR? And this completely contradicts the cyberpunk imagination, because what were the Landians all doing? What's the main drug in Neuromancer? It's speed, amphetamines. The worst things to take in VR. In VR, if you're going to take a drug in VR, the recommendation is an antiemetic or anti-nausea drug, similar to chemotherapy as well, which is marijuana. And so I was thinking, okay, what I was looking at, basically trying to formulate a hypothesis on the other end for explaining cyber sickness, and I think it is actually a clash between the map of the body and its movements in the brain, and the pure mapping of the simulation. And I think when you see them clash, we can therefore see that in both senses of clashing and melding, there is an argument to be made for the extension of the somatic experience in terms of these communications networks. Not because cyberspace has sort of new qualitative dimension. I think it's more in the sense of, honestly, objective spirit, that is habit formation, an institutional set of habits and practices that as we get more integrated into them, they start reflecting on both our consciousness, our self-consciousness, and therefore the relation of that to the ground of the body.
This is also reminding me very much of, in his course on perception, Simondon goes into these, he divides up these various levels of vigilance that we can learn and even form habits on. And he divides them up into four. Obviously, the first being sort of like a state of alarm. And so you can imagine ER doctors being at that first level, while they're on the clock, and sometimes even off, seeing how a lot of times they get called in and things like that. And I can imagine how those different various levels where we're, maybe you're not ever even just on one level at a time. Your brain is looking for that sort of dopamine feedback drip or whatever. And so, like, whether it's through the imagination, desire, or this habituation that you're talking about in these mappings, one can imagine being, even if you're on that sort of third or fourth level, which is more hypnagogic or meditative calm, you still got like one brain toe in that first level to get that notification, that push to send us. And whether or not that's always existed throughout history, or if it's just more, if we're just more like prone to it in this day and age, being in an age of computer technologies and whatnot, and being, I mean, the fact that we have cell phones, that we can be reached in various ways, email, messages from different platforms, text messages, calls, like having that strapped on means like that level of responsivity. Or sometimes like if it's a phone call and it's like, you're still, you're interested, but you're like, fuck, I don't know that number, go to voicemail, right? But back in the day, before that kind of thing, when everyone had a fucking computer in their pocket, that, you might have had like a landline, and you go even further back, like what is the means of being like sort of immediately reached and pinged, that's definitely something that that level of vigilance feels heightened. I mean, I'll fucking sleep with my phone like under my pillow just in case there's some sort of family emergency or something, so that you're like constantly always one step away from being reachable, and that being straddling those different layers of vigilance, just because of the phone and because of what it could pretend, good or ill, definitely feels like a part of this.
It's definitely a matter of acceleration, I think, rather than intensification. I mean, acceleration, intensification, but I don't think it's necessarily, as you said, it's not particularly new. It's just the speed of it.
Right.
I mean, someone was asked. I mean, my friend Nick Travellini asked me yesterday, sort of, when do you think the new flesh started in history? And I'm like, probably the Reformation. Like, I think Martin Luther was new flesh. In the sense that he was behaving like the data he produced because he was being paid basically constantly by the by the princes of Germany. I think there's a good bet for that. I mean, in terms of, I mean, I could get into the concept of new flesh a bit actually to clarify
Sure.
if it helps.
And before you do, isn't that a Pauline type of sort of metaphor of sort of throwing off the old clothes or the old flesh and putting on the new ones? I feel like that's,
it is in
St. Paul
Paul.
If he didn't create that, he definitely made it. I feel like he's like, I can't think of someone before him really making that metaphor stick.
Yeah, I found this out recently. Actually, I was sort of looking up New Flesh, and it's just a lot of biblical references.
Okay, there you go.
I thought I was just doing David Cronenberg, but yeah, the idea of New Flesh is, so I'm gonna start with what it isn't. So it's not the idea that the New Flesh is just like this. It's not just data. So it's, oh my God, I made a simulation of myself out in the world. I'm like, no, that's kind of commodity fetishism.
Yeah.
You don't own your data. It's not you. When we die, our Facebook profiles will still be owned by Meta. We will have no power over any of them. It's not data. It's not just influence either. Because otherwise, oh look, this person, people say, oh my God, kids are watching Skibbity Toilet, they're the new flesh. No. Look, we all watch Gmod like shit, shitty little Gmod things. I did when I was a kid. The guy who makes Skibbity Toilet is about as old as me. There was another good example of, sort of a moral panic over. Do you folks remember when there was loads of people doing NPC things on TikTok where they would act like NPCs and people would give them like money? I'm like, that's just acting. That's fine. Yeah. That's just acting. The new flesh specifically is only really meaningful in the context of data production. It's the body that behaves like the data it produces, not just the data it consumes. Because all consumption is production. It's specifically a mode of subjection, of the production of subjectivity, of the habituation of the body and the mind within the context of consistent and constant data production.
Right.
This is why I get into stuff like feedback addiction, the ways in which the platforms are infrastructurally designed to subjectivate you in that way. It is a kind of a subjection in the form of digital labor, rather than it is this idea of, oh my God, we're new beings now, we're in Blade Runner. It's like, no, we're still at work here, sadly.
Yeah, there's a bit of romanticization you have to sort of cut through, because it does feel very banal and almost like it almost feels like, oh yeah, we already know that, but that's only because of living through it, but not really like contemplating or thinking about it and reflecting on it, and the sort of what consequences follow from that. And so, yeah, I mean, even if Paul is talking in the sense of taking up the mantle of Christianity, or being reborn in the flesh and spirit of the Christian tradition, it's a little it's interesting to go back there, but it's not as helpful for our predicament, for our current situation.
No, absolutely.
I was thinking about that. Since you mentioned Cronenberg, do you have would it make sense to talk about, have you seen Extends? I'm sure you've seen that, right? The
I have seen
Existenz, I
Extends.
suppose. Existenz?
Extends is a that's for erectile dysfunction, correct? No,
Right.
yeah, existens, yes.
Existenz. Because
You
there
already
you have
said
a real
erection. You said erection. Now you said it extends. You're really on the phallic, the libidinal economy. No. Hopefully you've seen that, Adam. That's
Oh, yeah.
phalluses are everywhere for with those who with eyes to see or something like that.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, Existenz, I watched it, I think, just before submitting the manuscript. I mean, in terms of it, this book is kind of dripping with Cronenberg, particularly Videodrome and Existenz. But honestly, Existenz I found interesting. I think, for example, was it the realist insurrectionaries, the realist movement.
Right. Yeah.
I can sort of see something like that happening in the realm of AI to an extent.
The
But I think,
Butlerians.
yeah, although
Yeah.
the thing about the realists, um, in the world of the movie Existenz is, the Existenz machines fucking work. The video games actually do work. LLMs do not do anything close to that. I think I don't want to give the realists. I want to give the realists better enemies than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But honestly, the main Cronenberg movie that influenced this book was actually Naked Lunch. The William S.
I can see that.
Burroughs
Yeah.
biopic.
The Burroughsian theme runs throughout at
Because
least the middle of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's just constantly writing in that movie, and it's feeding back in his behavior. He says, "I'm addicted to something that might not even exist." He starts buying his own cover story. He starts behaving like he's in Naked Lunch. This is the Burroughs analog in the movie, not Burroughs himself, and it does that in this realm of pure addiction and fantasy. He even has a machine at one point, a typewriter, that literally ejaculates highly addictive opioid fluid when it likes what he's written. That is quite a decent model for the writing
Yeah.
machines of today. Whereas Videodrome, I think, is in too much of a paradigm of the spectacle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, whilst I don't always find myself necessarily on the same side as Baudrillard, his critique of the bored society of the spectacle, because in Society of the Spectacle, it's predominantly one way. It's just a TV sort of blaring out at us and having this sort of gap of representation. Whereas, the ecstasy of communication, the essay says it's not one way, it never has been. And I think the lack of the one way aspect is where I end up going more with Baudrillard and indeed against Cronenberg in Videodrome, because it is predominantly one way. There's just the programmer, the controller, and programming. There's not really anything feeding back into that. It's just more direct control. It's not even Burroughsian control, because Burroughs would say, control requires resistance. Otherwise, you're just using someone. He says, I'm using a tape recorder, but I'm not controlling it. In Videodrome, Max, he's just being, he's not even being controlled towards the end of it. He's just being used.
Which would be the short circuit of consumption and production.
Yeah, there'd be no resistance in the circuit whatsoever. It would just be a direct puppeteering.
Yeah.
There wouldn't need to be control. It would just be sort of almost raw and total discipline, even to the possible complete elimination of the subject.
It's almost a fantasy, right? That one could, if that were one's lot, that one could be used without being controlled, right? Like that there would be some sort of, the libidinal charge of subjection without any sort of necessary means of agency. I mean, that feels like a kind of, again, a fantasy, and I mean that in the broadest sense, not just in a kind of Lacanian Freudo sense.
I completely agree. I mean, they also got Crimes of the Future as well, which is, I think, and the latest Crimes of the Future, that is, from Cronenberg. I think one of the best movies he's made in ages. Although I still think his best movie is tied between, and shoot me internet, Naked Lunch, and A Dangerous Method. The Freud Jung Spielrein biopic. Love that one. And that is more the accelerationist fantasy that we will just desubjectivate and run off into the sunset. I'm still not buying it. There have been some really good books recently that have revived that idea. Not quite that idea, but much more complicated and nuanced in terms of desubjectivation. I mean, I'd always recommend Maya B. Chronic's and Amy Island's Cute Accelerationism. Straight up, fair enough. But most of this sort of accelerationist imaginary, I really do struggle with, or at least we need to ground it in something a bit more. Which is fair enough. You don't have doesn't always have to be serious. It can be a lovely, playful, creative act with some serious theory going through it in that very act. I mean, that's what Cute Accelerationism does so well.
Yeah.
But I'm still trying to sort of recuperate some of the, get rid of some of the Landian baggage, I think, of this kind of thinking.
And again, like you said, you're trying to find better targets and better enemies for if we're going to use the word resistance. And so it's a question of, I guess that the tie-in with Cute Accelerationism would be, and I liked how you worded this in your chapter on virality. I guess this was at the end, was the fact that the lie or the game is given away by reactionaries to the way in which they frame the panic, the moral panic around homosexuality, trans, LGBTQ plus. The way that they frame it actually gives the lie that virality is the methodology, the baseline reading for heteronormative majoritarian mode virality. I guess that's where I would like to go, is maybe, since you said that, well, I guess this was before you were recording, but the AI podcast didn't get to virality. We should spend some time maybe talking about that chapter.
Absolutely. 1 second though, Cooper. Sorry, can we just pause recording for a second?
Yeah.
I believe I might have to just quickly leave and rejoin because I think, wait, let me just double check, because I think Will is about to start a Foucault reading group on this exact same account. I apologize. I completely forgot about. So I might just have to. I'm going to copy an invite link and send it to myself, just so I can get back in on a different account.
Okay, perfect.
And this recording is still already going, so it should be I'll just be a different person on it.
Right. Yeah, we'll be fine, I think.
Correct.
As long as you have your Dune background.
Oh, it should be this. Yeah, have you guys gone video podcast now?
We haven't done one.
No,
yeah,
I mean.
Okay. I'll also have it. Don't worry. Okay. Sent. Okay. Be right back.
The problem with doing video is like the edits would be a lot more noticeable, so I'd have to put out raw, but I don't know. I mean, it might be somewhat, it seems that YouTube, like in that regard, is where the growth is as far as podcasts are concerned right now.
I mean, do people really just want to see me smoking a cigarette and like us? I mean, like,
but the way that it records though would be like it'll like it might be good to have the notes kind of on the screen. That will be predominantly kind of like what we see is similar to what the audience would see. So having the notes and various visual aids and using those would be provide some worth, I think.
Something to think about.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as editing, it's kind of like, meh. It'd be a lot longer. Okay, here's it. I did admit him, right? Yeah.
There he is.
Back in the room. Okay. Sorry. So yes, virality. So the chapter on virality. So it was a speculative attempt to. In the first place, it was a speculative attempt to sort of look at this idea of language being a virus, but particularly with a restrictive economy to word and image viruses, because the idea of going viral is so popular. Let's have a look at it. The second was an attempt to look at other books that are critical of AI as a kind of social media and the data economy as an industry, particularly the work of Richard Seymour, and try to go a little bit deeper. Because his definition is writing is marks on the surface meant to represent something for someone else. And I thought, okay, what if we actually apply some Deleuze-Guattarian pragmatics into linguistics here? The relations of power, the relations of communication, mix that in with a bit of Burroughs, and then see what we can do. On top of that, there was also the attempt to tackle this really bad use of the concepts of virality and contagion by various reactionary forces.
Yeah.
Concepts of a so-called mind virus, the concept of social contagion being used by various transphobes and fascists of all stripes. And I thought, okay, I'm going to look at virality. I'm going to undermine the use of social contagion by looking at actual virology textbooks, looking at the most recent edition of Flint et al.'s Principles of Virology, and then see if I can flush out this Burroughsian, this William S. Burroughs style sort of impulse and see what we can do with it. And so the first thing is essentially trying to look at the most updated forms of virology in terms of the concepts it uses and looking at what things essentially don't need to be metaphorical. So first of all, virality, or the virus in terms of its epistemology, used to be done by the famous, according to the postulates of the famous Koch, who discovered the tuberculosis bacterium. And essentially, it was the principle that works more or less as like a transcendental argument, somewhat. It's in the sense that it works backwards.
Yeah.
You have an infected, isolated matter. You work backwards to isolate disease, and the virus is determined in relation to disease. Ultimately, I think now in the age of bioinformatics, we can define viruses basically in terms of writing, in terms of informational qualities rendered as writing. The closer we get to understanding viruses, the more abstract they get as machinic processes. And I noticed that whilst virologists could always sort of bracket out the idea of, look, we keep saying they're doing this, they want to do this, they have a tendency for this, as various kinds of intentional metaphors. The only thing they couldn't get rid of was writing as the inscriptive capacity. Retroviruses, for example. So retroviruses are not viruses that take over the entire cell. They don't rewrite the entire cell. Rather, they use an enzyme called retranscriptase, literally got inscription in it, and they essentially add a little bit of code to they change a bit of code in a host cell, and then that cell becomes a provirus which spreads and reproduces itself with that edited code in there. And the virologists say, the problem is that retroviruses can mutate a lot because they don't have proofreaders. And I'm like,
right.
Writing is the only thing we can't escape here. And so I was attempting to look at virality in terms of breaking it from this traditional epistemology of explicitly always being tied to disease, defining them as abstract machines of communication and writing. And if we look at it from this perspective, one, we can see sort of how they work without giving in to the fascist temptations, and also see how contemporary forms of fascism interact with a kind of politics of immunology.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the crazier things like ivermectin other than like a semiotic virus going around that people try to immunize themselves from things? Immunity is the opposite of community. It erases debts. It eludes or arides allied steps. I was looking a lot at the work of people like George Bataille, Friedrich Engels, and Donatella de Cesare's book Immunodemocracy on this. And the process of virality is so central to so much communication, and indeed both in terms of the ways of policing things, in terms of trying to cut codes out, trying to write codes out of people, as well as the very possibility of mutability with any virus, especially retroviruses. And I believe most viral processes are retroviral. They try to supplement code rather than rewrite everything entirely, because you need to be a vector. To that extent, we can connect Death of the Author to contemporary sort of, Deleuze-Guattarian views on pragmatics of linguistics, and indeed new kinds and old kinds of fascist violence when it comes to sort of shutting down information. And if we talk about sort of the fascist hatred of certain kinds of information, we can therefore do so based on the politics of virality. And we can do so without turning into this stupid, liberal, fluffy, Orwellian position that they burn books because they hate learning, you know? The
Yeah.
people that the Nazis hated most was Plato. No. Plato gave a beautiful example of a fascist state in the
Yeah.
Republic. And no, what they hate is the codes in them. It's an immunological measure, and it's not the only one you can do. You know, it's why I talk about the different kinds of an archive. You know, we have what's called in Mel Wai Chen's work a viral archive, which is an archive of transformations and mutability. And the example that they give is transition archives on YouTube. You know, people learn to transform themselves and transform their habits. You know, partake in that wonderful process through the mediation of things like this. And these can indeed be rewriting processes we can partake in. Sorry, that's a very long answer to the question about virality, but it is the biggest chapter.
No, but it got to the thing that I really appreciated was and I guess we could talk a little bit more about is the reactionaries, the immune response show the way in which not only, you know, I guess it's the lie that or the lie that gets exposed is that in the majoritarian minoritarian is the fact that the baseline argument would not want to concede the fact that cis heteronormative patriarchal familial society as the majoritarian is itself self-replicating in this viral manner, right? And so once the perspective is shifted and outside of just normal pathological, which might be that more old school type of epistemological argument you were referring to, once the ground shifts and it is admitted that it is a code attempting to replicate itself at the expense in the reactionary fascistic position of all other forms of replication, that's I think there's a very powerful paradigm shift. Not to use like but it shifts the argument. It shifts the ground, the terrain for how to frame these issues with reactionaries.
No, I completely agree. I mean, in terms of, I just want to reiterate again for the listeners. When I say something is a virus, I don't mean it's a disease. That's a matter of politics. I mean, I think the distinction, as you pointed out, Taylor, between the normal and the pathological. Yeah. I mean, that is the Kantian distinction. Not quite normal pathological, but sort of in a way almost the rational and the pathological.
Yes.
That is a distinction between acting according to the universal law of freedom and acting according to total heteronomy in the second critique, the critique of practical reason. And I think in a way I'm not sure whether this method of virality is it's probably not dialectical. It's probably more like transcendental, empiricist than anything else. And yeah, in terms of what codes get replicated and how people sort of try to change their relationships to dominant forms of social reproduction through recoding things. Yeah, completely. I mean, the politics has to really, in a way, sort of come first. Politics has to precede being, to take that sort of Deleuze-Guattarian phrase. Because otherwise you get to this very Silicon Valley idea that information wants to be free. Information doesn't want shit. Information is differences to make a difference. They all got to happen somewhere, and they ain't happening to themselves.
Well, it's interesting too because it puts into perspective something like how the slogan, the 14-word slogan about like securing. I can't even. I'm not a good enough fascist to be able to. But securing the future for white children, right, in the white race and all that shit. Which I use probably more or less than 14 words to say. That is itself an attempt at virality, even particularly through a kind of slogan, right? That itself could semiotically go viral, but that care and concern, not to pun on Heidegger, but maybe I am. We are talking about fascists for replicating one's own sort of end group and identity group, whether it be cis heteronormative, whether it be white racial, that itself is, attempting, or again, shifting the argument, it's seeing subjects as merely propagators of not disease, as you said, right, but a certain type of viral propagation that sort of lives through us in the way that Deleuze talked about, like becoming a kind of vector space for thought, and the thought sort of flows through, but instead in a much more insidious and destructive way. Especially when it comes from the majoritarian that wants to, at the extreme, sort of wipe out. You hear like someone like Matt Walsh wanting to sort of do away with he'll call it transgender ideology, but it's not ideology. Doesn't really quite get to it. It hints at it, but it doesn't quite get to. Even if he's not calling for extermination and genocide, he's calling for a total immune response that I assume would not balk at genocide and extermination. But the way he's framing it is in a way of like stamping out, obviously from the fascist position, what he considers to be a disease, right? A social plague, but he is sort of again giving the lie that by inference, his own position in the majoritarian mode itself is a means of virality.
Oh yes, absolutely. Every fascist is attempting to go completely viral. I mean, they don't understand virality, but this is one of the things I think people who necessarily are good at going viral don't necessarily understand virality, because it doesn't mean that, it's like if you make loads of money selling self-help books, it just says you're good at making money selling self-help books. Doesn't mean that you're going to get rich, if you read the book. And especially as well with the way people think about viruses in that lot's sort of sphere. I mean, they think of viruses as basically being like mind control devices. Semioviruses are more like supplementals, almost like sort of habitual sort of like nudges or refrains. Not nudges in the sense of nudge theory. I'm not getting into that bullshit, but they are just general things in one's informational patterns that can feed into your habits, and they can't. They don't always take over. You don't. Not everyone can. There's a further research to be done in terms of, for example, people's receptivity to them. Richard Seymour's actually picked some of this up in his latest book. And there's also research currently being done, has been done for years, on things called inoculation theory. I am not sure whether or not I really want to take this. I did plan to take the sort of theory of virality a lot further. I'm not sure I want to, because if it's wrong, then it's wrong. Fine, yeah, thank God. If it's right, then I'm not going to write. I'm not going to be the Eddie Bernays of the 21st century. If I write like a theory of like a techniques of virality, that would be absolutely atrocious. I mean, because whilst I do think the mutability of virality means you can't really control it in the last instance, for a decent chunk of that instance, you fucking can. You can at least seed it. I mean, this is basically what the press does. The press's job is to discipline the public. They're currently trying to say, no, bad public. Luigi Mangione is not a hero. Bad.
Yeah.
And everyone's going, no, he is. It's kind of cool we killed that dude. And then everyone's going, no, bad public. The viruses don't necessarily pick up because, why would you take in information necessarily from someone who hates you? It's not just if it goes through our sort of eyes and our ears or anything, and therefore it sort of takes over, but rather it is a method of distributing and proliferating writing, and we don't always take everything we don't believe everything we read. We don't take it in. Whereas the enemy are sort of working on the sort of Goebbels mind control model of virality, which has never really existed, but because some of these things do actually take off because liberalism is always in the sense latently pre-fascist. They think that means they've got sort of virality sorted, but that's not really the case. It always mutates further than when even they can control. It's why, it's why like sort of Republicans, they were still chasing after Mitt Romney on January the 6th because not even the Conservatives can't necessarily control their own sort of viral herd to that extent, insofar as they see them as one, because they're not.
You mean Mike Pence, or you said Mitt Romney?
Oh no! I was remembering him being like ushered down the hall by a security guard running away.
Okay.
They did want to kill Mike Pence as well, but
right, yeah.
Again,
I mean,
hell, one of them tried killing.
Yeah.
One of them tried killing Trump.
Yeah, well, yeah, and yeah, that's I guess that's and you see this on social media too sometimes, where you talk about the liberal, but you see it also on the left, where sometimes there is also an immunoresponse that against the a sort of reactionary take on certain things, and there always has to be a kind of try to correct. Or I hate that this is just how sometimes things go viral, is trying to self-correct a fascist or reactionary interpretation of a current event or a recent event, and so the quote-unquote discourse gets seeded on reactionary ground, and trying to sort of reappropriate that to sort of change the the narrative. But that gets a little bit beyond. I mean, it's still in this context of what does and why things go viral on social media, but it generalizes a little bit.
Yeah, and I think strike's also a good aspect of virality as well, talking about it in sort of more meat-based context. Sort of, coding virally like a demand, like the wages of the housework movement, for example. As well as, it is just another way to talk about network effects in the domain of the production of writing. I mean, in terms of like labor struggles on the platforms, the spread of demand for fair wages amongst moderators in Kenya who moderate data sets, because as PMS folks, AI does not exist, will never exist. It's a marketing term, and it's to invisibilize labor. Sex workers famously have fought against OnlyFans in its attempt to sort of cleanse itself of them in order to make itself more palatable to payment companies. There are marginal labor struggles, and indeed, the example I give of a minor virality literature, there's two I give. Well, one was not quite minor, but one of them was the Goethe effect, the copycat effect on the Sorrows of the Young Werther, and then Lysistrata, the spreading of a sex strike throughout all of Greece. And in terms of the general sense of virality today, I think, in a way, sort of by explaining it, it's most intense, we can also demystify it a bit. It's not that these things work on their own accord; they're all just in the same circulations. But if you're throwing something around very, very fast all the time, viruses are not. They don't fly out of our mouths because they have an intent. Rather, they're pushed out by our breathing. There's material forces that push them out. They don't move of their own accord.
I'll ask a general question. This goes back to the origin story. In the postscript, you mention in passing your own sort of dalliances with the kind of, I guess this gets us to some of the AI stuff. But you did mention some of your own personal labor with some of these fly by night things. Do you want to talk a little bit about that to set up the discussion for the postscript?
Yes, absolutely. So for when I was sort of I think first year of PhD, sort of last couple of years of undergrad, for some extra cash, I did what was I was working for a few platforms that do what we now call micro work. So I'll just give an example of some of the tasks. Wasn't much. You got paid like, I think most of them was like £10 in a day from doing this, but it was just extra scratch. I had to make up the difference. So one of the tasks was you literally just like rated Facebook adverts, and you could like correct them if there's anything was wrong with them. Or one time it was one task was correcting search queries. So you say, okay, someone has put this into Amazon. Mark whether you think it's accurate to that search, or for Google. It was for a company called, I did it for one company called Appen, the one called Lionbridge, and these guys are data moderators.
Yeah.
And that's what they pay next to nothing. And I stopped doing it for years, and then I found a book by a guy called Phil Jones, no relation, called Work Without the Worker. And he was talking about how these platforms are everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're predominantly getting people in the global south, millions of them, as part of various sort of IMF economic plans, as well as increasingly loads and loads of people in refugee camps doing this kind of data moderation. And it wasn't too hard to connect this to so-called AI, these LLMs, these data sets, which invisibilize this kind of labor. And ultimately, when I was looking at Appen, they were subcontracted by Google. And Google were hired to do a project called Maven. They were hired to do that project by the Pentagon, it was very similar micro working tasks. People predominantly in things like refugee camps, incredibly precarious workers in the global south, people displaced by war and the very economic foundations of something like Google and the Pentagon, and indeed Apple, were labeling faces on those little captures people do to get into websites.
Yeah.
That data was going into drones. And I'm like, okay, the data production, it's beyond Twitter or anything like this. It is the infrastructure that I'm describing fits the entire imperialist model
Yeah.
of contemporary capitalism.
And it's, I mean, that is, if you wanted to end on a happy note, that's you're going to get, reader. That's terrifying. Now, on the other hand, you do call throughout the book for different modes of whether it be resistance or let's say counter effectuation. Like at the end of the virality, you pun off of gosh, it's not just Deleuze and Guattari. I'm trying to think, but maybe they get it from somewhere else. But let what 1,000 minor viralities bloom or something like this, right?
It's now.
Yes. Oh, thank you. God, I swear that they pun off of it, but no, I think that my theory brain is scrambled. You do call throughout for, I mean, maybe not like Coop said, attack the data centers, although with the way in which that kind of technology is being mobilized directly and fed back into warfare. I mean, like you mentioned in the struggle in Gaza and how this stuff is tried and tested. It's a fucking, not just a battleground, but a testing ground, a laboratory for these new terrifying technologies. It does feel bleak, and maybe that's part of the I guess that is part of the reality. It's not, you're not sugarcoating it, but you're also not claiming a kind of defeatism.
No, we cannot be defeatist at all, because you might have heard this out. For all of the smart technology, for all of the apartheid facial recognition, for all of the listening posts are wired into the grounds, for all of this every stupid thing coming out of the quote unquote startup nation, those fucking smart fences weren't so fucking smart when it really came down to it. And if we're going to be sober about these technologies, we have to report when people actually defeat them, because they are being defeated all the time by people who aren't the so-called technologically smart. This isn't just me. This is Fanon. Fanon and the rest of the earth says that Engels has this stupid argument in Anti-During that he says that basically revolver beats sword. No, it doesn't necessarily. It really doesn't. We can't just be a simple technological determinist. One, because the technology usually doesn't work. Two, because technology is very fragile. Three, because we've seen it be defeated.
Murphy's Law.
We have it. Absolutely. We have a duty to report when things like this, when these systems are destroyed, because that shows they're destroyable. Because if we leave it just at the idea that it's a laboratory, then it basically tells sort of our governments that, or everyone say, oh yeah, these things are battle tested in Gaza, and it with the suggestion that they work, as in, like, for example, I didn't mention the AI the Israelis use, Lavender, Where's Daddy, Habsora, because if you've already got, this place is already tightly surveyed, it's an apartheid state. Apartheid states have incredible amounts of surveillance data. They don't need an AI to make kill lists. They never have, especially if they're doing it so meticulously indiscriminately, and I mean that exactly in the way I say it. So I really don't think, one, there's no need to fear or hope, only need to look for new weapons. And it turns out a lot of the old ones work pretty damn well. Now, I was going to call this thing How to Blow Up a Data Center, but you shouldn't blow up data centers because Musk puts them in, very working class areas. They don't put them where they are, and they're usually powered by shitty methane generators. A big magnet will probably do a good work with server banks. Big magnet, lads, big magnet. And I mean, plus, Microsoft's new AI generator on 3 Mile Island. I don't recommend blowing up that data center, folks, because they ain't gonna feel the impact of that. But I think there is plenty of hope here because the technology is so tied to an economy of images as it is detached from anything that's actually does anything. Um, it's AI, Peter Griffin, Shrimp Jesus. It's also, I mean, the problem with contemporary capitalism is the money has started having ideas. And luckily for us, the ideas are stupid, but also very wasteful and
Right.
destructive. Billionaires, and they've read their, their Fedorov, their Nick Land, and they're all sort of huffing their own supply. But doesn't mean that anything they're doing is actually working. Usually, it's just a way of getting more money, and from government departments as they sort of hollow them out in the traditional neoliberal style. And ultimately, they get paid whether it works or not, and they keep paying people to tell them whether it works, regardless of
Right.
whether it does. This is why, you know, the Saudi government, Mohammed bin Salman, can kill about 100,000 people building a stupid fucking line, which is never going to work. That light the city, the line. We are in the sort of the realm of almost incredibly powerful forms of individual, like highly concentrated capital, but it is just making a lot of shit that doesn't work. And we can't believe the hype. Um, we can't believe the hype in either direction. We can't believe the hype in terms of it's going to produce Blade Runner, it's going to produce God,
Yeah.
it's going to produce Y2K, but we can't believe the hype that these machines actually work because they can and have and will still be being destroyed.
So I would say that if the call for action and mobilization is the malevolence, the hope that undergirds that and spurs it on and keeps it afloat is the incompetence, right? Like the malevolence is the reason to counteract, but the reason to hope that it's not merely a lost cause is the incompetence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if people become more have more of a sense of we are producing data here, they might have some more sense of leverage. In the example I gave before
It's a good
with
point.
OnlyFans workers, with I know some people who work for a law firm that gets people's data using EU law because the company won't give it to them and they'll say like you didn't complete, usually gig workers, you didn't complete this delivery, you're not getting paid. They sue for that data. They contest that claim. People get there. You can contest them quite a bit, and these systems don't work very well. They more sell you on the image, and it's more in a sense of um, it is in the sense of the Butlerian Jihad because
Yeah.
as the latest Dune series fails to pick up on by basically making it the Terminator war against the machines. Herbert's view of the idea of the Butlerian Jihad is that no, people with machines controlled us. And it's not even that we have people with machines controlling us, but it's people with machines that hide the people doing the actual work.
Right.
It's making labor diffuse because AI systems require loads of labor. It's just diffuse against hundreds of people spread, hundreds of miles away. It's like if we ever get self-driving cars, I bet you it's going to take a lot of training data. Hell, they might even be driven by someone that very same state is deported, who probably used to drive one. These are machines of great invisibilization. If we sort of wake up to this now and understand this sort of the logistics of it, then you can start finding points of basically sabotage and, or indeed at least workers resistance.
Waymo does have humans in the cockpit now to monitor what's going on, actually. Interestingly enough, which is like an automated cab service, which is way ahead of Elon, which is kind of funny.
There we go. There we go. Jeff
It's funny,
Bezos
but not
called it the
surprising.
Mechanical Turk. He called it Mechanical Turk for a reason.
To your point about the Butlerian Jihad, I think that would go back to your point in the book about the relation and how it's like it's not the battle. It's not about the battle with the machines. It's about the battle with those that control the machines. It's about a battle against dead labor and its mobilization against us and the control mechanisms.
Absolutely. Doesn't mean all machines have to stick around. I mean, like the people's AI. It might be the case that we have to throw all this stuff off the edge.
Yeah.
If there's a revolution in Congo tomorrow, no more infinite machines. We're gonna have to not so we have to get rid of them all, but we necessarily can't have the new Apple model every year, and that's not very good for us anyway. But it's trying to stay as completely open ended about the political aspects of technology that it's either going to be saving us but there are potentials there which I'm not going to sort of typically downplay, because then you end up being you don't really get to anyone.
Where the danger is, no, I'm not gonna quote Holdren. Already mentioned Heidegger once. That's my quota. I'm not gonna. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I guess I will mention him again. Fuck it. I mean, I do think that you know, this is part of the my dissatisfaction with something like the whole notion of enframing Gestell and all of this. Like, it's he's just not. We maybe it's part of the acceleration, but he's just not even close, in my opinion, to getting into the nitty gritty of what ails us today. This question of like what his favorite thing is the Rhine and the hydroelectric dam and the storing up of power and you know, I think that's again it's maybe just as outdated as the epistemological model you were looking at with symptomatology and classifying pathologies versus normal functionings. I just don't think that's quite helpful. It's too heavy-handed, right? In the way that you were describing the way in which reactionaries and even the media don't understand virality, right? In their Goebbels style, you know, it's so I guess, but I do think that there is. I mean, one of the things that you mention is like there is a sense in which, you know, you mentioned like the drought instead of the cloud. Like there is a way in which if capital incessantly pushes back its boundaries and able to sort of keep reterritorializing them, there is a limit, at least on the sort of planetary milieu of what is possible, right? There is we keep seeing it. We keep saying that there's the devastation that is heralded by all of this type of, and it's again that goes with the acceleration. There's a sense in which like you said, it feels like you know, collapse is the alternative to sort of fighting back and turning the tide back against the onslaught of I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sorry. I just think about you know, fight class war, not culture war. I don't know. That's going to be my slogan instead of network and net worth.
I believe they're the same. They're the same thing. I think. That's just me being a plane of eminence, sort of completely flattening
It's
it.
about social relations, man. Okay.
All right.
It's about
fight the social war, not the culture war.
Turn the imperialist war into a class war. What that was that? No, it was a civil war. That was a Lenin quote. No. Sorry. No, I completely get. I mean, in terms of virality, in terms of production, in terms because why I try to frame virality mostly in terms of competitions over social reproduction.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about the semiovirus of the tradwife phenomenon, you know, even people like, you know, the sort of reactionary nonsense you get through YouTube shorts, the sort of infrastructure that Musk has built his own little what they call reality distortion field around. But I think actually, and you also take a completely right to bring up the planetary limits of this. The big problem is that our betters won't be told about these limits because they simply believe the map is the territory, and if it isn't, then it bloody well should be.
Yeah.
CEOs, as a weird subsection of the human species, let's say, only hear the word no once. That's at their divorce trials. That is the last time anyone says no to them. Because if anyone says no to them, they just pay them to get someone else. And it takes a certain sort of, you know, Wile E. Coyote running headfirst into the real that, you know, I mean, basically, I think to that extent, that's kind of what Baudrillard thinks terrorism is, to some extent. You know, it's just not just a real returning, but sort of refusing the current economy of death, accelerating that, and then sort of throwing the reality, the territory under the mapping headfirst into the enemy's face. Like, oh shit, yeah, we simply couldn't pay our way to occluding this. And not I'm saying we should be fucking terrorists or anything. No, you can achieve a kind of digital class consciousness without any of that. You can do a kind of general digital labor refusal with these machines. You don't have to go, attack Twitter or anything. That's not what it is. It's like going after the post office. Again, the office of posting. But it is interesting the extent to which the class that runs this will not be told otherwise. And sort of in a way, if you're going to accelerate anything, accelerate them sort of running into that limit. Because they're not going to do it until they've taken us all down with them or accumulated enough capital that, I bet, Peter Thiel's kind of thinking like, well, when I get to New Zealand, how do I put like bomb collars and all security guards, do I keep like a vault or something like tied to my like blood type or something? They are stuck in this well, not fantastic, but phantasmal mode of apocalypticism, because they can't imagine anything else. They think it's their way or the highway, which is currently burning down.
Oh, it's fine. We'll just get new planets to exploit. I mean, we're gonna go to Mars and anyway. Adam, at this juncture, we always, unless Coop, did you want to bring up any other points?
No.
I was gonna give Adam the what else can we see from you? Are you going to say be turning your Sterner PhD into a book?
Yes.
What do we have forthcoming, my friend?
Okay, so the Sterner PhD will be turned into a book at some point, and because of academic presses being what they are, a very piratable PDF. And then what else? So we over Asset Horizon we had the Acephalus project, the Erotic Tarot of George Bataille, which has an accompanying book of essays, some of which are written by myself. I'm going to be doing essays on a sort of critiquing Bataille's view of reproduction, which is a fabulous view of reproduction. And in fact, there's literally no women involved, so quite some
just like
limits
Plato.
there. Yeah. Plato disavows them. Bataille just doesn't even mention anything to do with it. It is truly phallologocentric, to use a $50 word there.
So not even a diatema in the reproduction of philosophers, right?
No diatema.
Okay.
So I'll be looking into some of that. Also done an essay on Bataille and war, and particularly his relationship to Fanon in terms of how they both think about redistribution in the face of nuclear war and the Cold War. Write some stuff on Desaad. Craig's me writing some stuff on Bataille and sort of the affects of boredom and imagination. Noah's going to do some stuff on the masochist sort of disavowal in Bataille, and then after that, after the Sterner book and the Bataille book, sometime next year, there will be sort of the third part of sort of a cybernetic trilogy of writings coming out, which is the new Zero Classics edition of Mark Fisher's Flatline Constructs, which I wrote an introduction for, which sort of summarizes the sort of the general outlook of the CCRU and its limitations, which I say in the preface to this book, The New Flesh, sort of drove me to sort of write this. So that's I think everything so far. Also, you can probably find some of my other articles over at the New International magazine for a new leftist publication. Jacobin, if it was more focused on fighting the class war rather than relitigating 2016 YouTube comments every time. We're coming for you, Sankara. No, that's it. And I think
it sometimes feels worse than that, even though, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, YouTube comments is definitely almost qualifies as slop, but the Jacobin always there's no bottom of the barrel.
There is no bottom of the barrel, but social democracy, can't live with them.
And there's a good piece in I really liked your take on. I know we already did the outro, but I want to say I liked your framing of social democracy in the book. Again, some of this bleeds together, and so I will say in passing, but I really liked your framing of that and the way in which it was attempts to, like, I'm not gonna say buy off, but sort of get people to buy into out of communization and etc.
It was the New Deal. It was the New Deal. I mean, I recently did talk with that sort of interview with Owen Havley. He's talking about all these housing co-ops in New York. You could be a socialist and get your housing co-ops funded by people like even like Robert Moses, on the basis that you weren't going to be communist.
No, okay.
And I think that was kind of the trade-off there. Yeah.
But that goes into the immunization thesis,
Yep.
and these other things, and so no, but yes, either buy or steal the new flesh, listeners. I say steal very not pejoratively. It's however the ideas are to propagate themselves.
Information wants to be free.
Feed back into that loop. And the full title again, Adam, if you will, it's I don't know the subtitle, but
yes, it's The New Flesh: Life and Death in the Data Economy.
Nice, I like it. Very. I can't believe we had a St. Paul reference in this, man. I didn't even reading through the book. I didn't even think about St. Paul until Coop asked the question about framing that phrase, and I was like, man,
I didn't until you brought it up. I'm like, oh god damn, there's like do I get a Gamben with this now? Then, like,
yeah, well, we need to bring in Will for that, so maybe next time. Well, Coop, do you want to outro us, my friend?
Once again, thanks to our friend Adam Jones for joining us to discuss the new flesh on this week's edition of the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour. We'll see y'all next week.
The very roots of evil, of negativity and singularity. Including the ultimate form of singularity, which is Oculus. Violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here. So on and so on. What I meant is the following.
With nothing left but recycled, whitewashed, lobotomized people, as in Clockwork Orange.